The rain came down in sheets that October afternoon in 1878, turning the dusty streets of Carson City, Nevada into rivers of mud, and Delilah Rhodes wondered if anyone would stop to buy flowers from a soaked woman standing beneath a threadbare shawl that did little to keep her dry. She had picked wildflowers from the hills that morning before the storm rolled in, bundling them with strips of cloth she had torn from an old dress. And now, she stood on the corner near the Silver Dollar Saloon, hoping someone might spare a few coins for something beautiful in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving. Her father had died 3 months ago in a mining accident, and her mother had followed him 2 weeks later from a fever that swept through their small cabin, leaving Delilah alone at 19 with nothing but debts and a determination to survive that burned hotter than any forge. The wooden sidewalk creaked behind her, and she turned to see a man approaching on horseback, his hat pulled low against the rain, water streaming from the brim in a steady curtain. He dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle, his boots splashing in a puddle as he tied his horse to the hitching post outside the saloon. Delilah noticed his eyes first when he looked her way, a startling green that stood out against his sun-weathered face, and she straightened her shoulders despite the cold water running down her back, lifting one of her flower bundles hopefully. "Flowers, sir," she called out, her voice carrying over the drumming rain. "Fresh picked this morning, only 10 cents a bundle." The cowboy stopped, his gaze moving from her face to the flowers clutched in her reddened hands, then back to her face again. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. Something in his expression shifted, a softness entering those green eyes that made Delilah's breath catch in her throat. "How many bundles you got there?" he asked, stepping closer. Delilah quickly counted. 15, sir. I have 15 bundles." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, extracting several coins that glinted silver even in the gray light. "I will take them all," he said simply, holding out the money. Delilah stared at him, certain she had misheard over the sound of the rain. "All of them? But sir, that is $1.50. What would you do with 15 bundles of wildflowers?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, transforming his serious face into something warmer. "Well, I figure a woman standing in the rain trying to make an honest living deserves better than to catch her death of cold out here. And I figure these flowers will brighten up the bunkhouse something fierce. The boys have been complaining it smells like old boots and saddle leather." Despite herself, Delilah laughed, the sound surprising her after weeks of nothing but worry and grief. She handed him the flowers, all 15 bundles, and accepted the coins he pressed into her palm. His hand was rough with calluses but warm, and when their fingers touched, she felt a jolt of something she could not quite name. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have no idea what this means to me." The cowboy tucked the flowers under one arm, seemingly unbothered by the rain soaking them further. "What is your name?" he asked. "Delilah." "Delilah Rhodes." "Ethan Tucker," he replied, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and oddly charming. Then, as if making a decision, he added, "Miss Rhodes, have you had supper yet?" Delilah blinked rain from her lashes, confusion and something that might have been hope warring in her chest. "Supper? Yes, madam. A meal, food. I know a place just down the street, the Frontier restaurant that serves the best pot roast this side of the Sierras. And I am thinking that anyone who has been standing in the rain selling flowers probably could use a hot meal and a chance to dry off." His green eyes searched her face, and she saw nothing but genuine kindness there, no hidden intentions or expectations that made her wary. She should say no. She knew she should. A proper young lady did not accept dinner invitations from strange men, no matter how kind their eyes or how generous their wallet. But Delilah had not eaten since yesterday morning. Her stomach had been growling for hours, and something about Ethan Tucker made her want to take a chance. "I would like that very much," she heard herself say. "Thank you, Mr. Tucker." "Ethan," he corrected, then glanced down at himself with a rueful expression. "Though I suppose we should both get out of this rain before we drown standing up. Come on." He offered her his arm, still clutching the flowers in his other hand, and Delilah took it, feeling the solid strength of him even through the wet fabric of his shirt. They hurried down the sidewalk together, dodging puddles and the occasional splash from a passing wagon, until they reached the Frontier restaurant with its painted sign swinging wildly in the wind. The warmth inside hit Delilah like a physical force, and she could not suppress a shiver as her body registered the temperature change. The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps that cast a golden glow over everything. A few other patrons sat scattered at various tables, and a plump woman with gray hair pinned in a neat bun emerged from the kitchen, her face breaking into a smile when she saw Ethan. "Ethan Tucker, you are dripping all over my clean floor," she scolded, but there was affection in her voice. "Get yourself over by the stove before you catch your death. And who is this young lady?" "This is Miss Delilah Rhodes," Ethan said, guiding Delilah toward the pot-bellied stove in the corner. "Delilah, this is Mrs. Martha Henderson. She runs the best restaurant in Carson City, though do not tell her I said so, or she will get a swelled head." Martha swatted at him with her apron. "Flattery will get you an extra helping of pie, boy. Now sit down, both of you, and let me get you some coffee to warm your bones. Miss Rhodes, I have a shawl in the back that is dry if you would like to trade out that wet one." Delilah wanted to refuse, pride making her stiffen, but the practical part of her brain won out. "That would be very kind, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you." While Martha bustled off to fetch the shawl, Ethan arranged the flower bundles on their table, spreading them out so they would not crush each other. Water dripped from the petals onto the tablecloth, but he seemed unconcerned. His attention focused on making sure each bundle was displayed to its best advantage. Delilah watched him, this strange cowboy who had bought all her flowers and invited her to dinner, and wondered what twist of fate had brought him into her life on this miserable, rainy afternoon. Martha returned with a thick wool shawl in a deep blue color, and Delilah gratefully exchanged her soaked one, feeling warmer immediately. The older woman also brought 2 steaming cups of coffee, rich and black, and Delilah wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers. "Now then," Martha said, pulling out a small notebook and pencil, "what will you two have?" "We have got pot roast with carrots and potatoes, fried chicken with biscuits, or beef stew with fresh bread." Delilah's mouth watered at all the options, but she knew she should choose the least expensive item. Before she could speak, however, Ethan said, "2 pot roasts, please, Martha. And bring us some of that apple pie when we are done. Coming right up." Martha disappeared back into the kitchen, leaving them alone at their table near the stove. Ethan took a sip of his coffee, then set down the cup and looked at Delilah directly. "So how long have you been selling flowers?" The question was simple enough, but Delilah felt the weight of her entire situation pressing down on her. She could lie, could pretend this was just a little enterprise she had taken up for pocket money. But something about Ethan's steady gaze made her want to tell the truth. 3 weeks, she said quietly. "Since I ran out of the money my parents had saved. They both died recently, and there were debts. The landlord took most everything we owned to settle what my father owed." I have been staying in a boarding house, but if I cannot pay the rent by the end of the week, Mrs. Patterson said she will have to ask me to leave. Ethan's jaw tightened, and she saw anger flash in his eyes, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "How much do you owe?" $5, Delilah admitted, the number feeling enormous and impossible. "I have been selling flowers every day, but most days I only make 20 or 30 cents. People do not have much money to spare for things that are not necessary." "Flowers are necessary," Ethan said firmly. "Maybe not for survival, but for the soul, for remembering that there is beauty in the world even when everything feels hard." He paused, then added, "My mother used to say that. She loved flowers, grew them in boxes outside our house back in Missouri. She died when I was 14, and after that, my father never planted flowers again, said it hurt too much to look at them." Delilah heard the old grief in his voice and recognized it because she carried the same weight herself. "I am sorry," she said softly. "Losing a parent is hard. Losing both is harder than I ever imagined." They sat in silence for a moment, the rain hammering against the windows and the warmth of the stove wrapping around them like a blanket. Martha appeared with 2 plates piled high with pot roast, carrots, potatoes, and thick slices of bread slathered with butter. The smell made Delilah dizzy with hunger, and she had to force herself to eat slowly, to not shovel the food into her mouth like someone starving, even though that was exactly what she was. Ethan ate with the efficiency of a man used to working hard and needing fuel, but he kept glancing up at her between bites, and Delilah had the sense he was memorizing her face. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her, this bedraggled girl with her wet hair and worn dress and desperate circumstances. "What do you do?" she asked, needing to break the silence. "You said something about a bunkhouse and the boys complaining. Are you a ranch hand?" Ethan nodded, swallowing a bite of potato. "I work at the Double T Ranch about 5 miles north of town. Been there for 3 years now. We run cattle mostly, some horses. It is good work, honest work, and the owner, Tom Thatcher, treats us fair. I have been saving my wages, thinking about maybe getting my own place someday. Nothing big, just a few acres where I could run some stock and maybe plant a garden." He smiled slightly. "With flowers." The image he painted was so vivid and appealing that Delilah felt an ache in her chest. A home, a garden, a place to belong. Everything she had lost. "That sounds wonderful," she said, and meant it. They talked through the rest of the meal, conversation flowing easier than Delilah would have expected with a virtual stranger. Ethan told her about life on the ranch, about the other cowboys he worked with, and the challenges of keeping cattle safe from rustlers and predators. Delilah told him about her childhood, about her father's work in the silver mines and her mother's skill with a needle, how she had taught Delilah to sew and embroider before the fever took her. By the time Martha brought out 2 generous slices of apple pie with cream, Delilah felt more relaxed than she had in months. The food had warmed her from the inside, and Ethan's steady presence across the table made her feel safe in a way she could not quite explain. "Miss Rhodes," Ethan said as they finished their pie, his tone turning serious, "I hope you will not think me forward, but I would like to help you with your rent situation." Delilah stiffened immediately, her guard slamming back into place. "Mr. Tucker, I cannot accept charity. I appreciate the dinner more than you know, but I will not take money from you." "It would not be charity," Ethan said quickly. "It would be an investment. See, I have been thinking. The ranch house where Tom and his wife live, they have this big porch that runs along the front. And Mrs. Thatcher has been wanting to make the place look nicer, more welcoming. What if you could provide flowers for them? Regular deliveries, maybe twice a week. I bet they would pay you good money for that, and probably some of the other ranch wives in the area would too once word got around. Delilah stared at him, her mind racing. You think they would want that? Really? I know they would. Mrs. Thatcher is always talking about how she misses the gardens they had back east. And there are 4 other big ranches within riding distance, all run by families with wives who would probably love fresh flowers. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. But you would need a little time to get it started, to make the rounds and talk to folks. So what I am proposing is this. I lend you the $5 for your rent. You pay me back once you start making regular money from the ranch deliveries. No interest, no rush. Just neighbors helping neighbors. It was too good to be true, Delilah thought. Men did not just help women like this without wanting something in return. But when she looked into Ethan's eyes, she saw only genuine sincerity and kindness that made her want to believe in good people again. Why would you do this for me? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. You do not even know me. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gaze dropping to the flowers on their table, then back to her face. My mother used to tell me that kindness is never wasted, even if you do not see the results right away. And I guess I see someone working hard to make her way in the world, and I want to help if I can. Is that so strange? Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of this man, would not show him just how desperately she needed his help. But her voice was thick when she spoke. It is not strange, it is just rare. And I accept your offer, Mr. Tucker. Ethan, I will pay you back every cent, I promise. His smile could have lit the whole restaurant. I never doubted it for a second. The rain had lightened to a drizzle by the time they left the restaurant, the worst of the storm having blown through. Ethan insisted on walking Delilah back to her boarding house, carrying the flowers he had bought, because he said they would be too awkward for her to manage. They walked slowly through the muddy streets, talking and laughing, and Delilah realized with a start that she had not felt this light, this hopeful, since before her parents died. The boarding house was a plain 2-story building on the edge of town, paint peeling and shutters hanging crooked. Delilah felt embarrassed bringing Ethan here, showing him the depths of her reduced circumstances. But he looked at the building with the same steady acceptance he had shown everything else. I will come by tomorrow after I finish work at the ranch, he said, pulling out his wallet and extracting a $5 bill. We can go talk to the Thatchers together if you would like, introduce you properly. Delilah took the money, folding it carefully. I would like that very much. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. He handed her the bundles of flowers, their fingers brushing again, and Delilah felt that same jolt of connection. Sleep well, Delilah, and do not worry so much. Things have a way of working out. She watched him walk back down the street toward the livery where he had left his horse, his figure growing smaller in the twilight. Then she turned and went inside, clutching the flowers and the money, feeling like maybe, just maybe, her luck was starting to change. Mrs. Patterson was waiting in the front hallway, her thin face pinched with disapproval. Miss Rhodes, you are late for supper, and you are tracking mud everywhere. I apologize, Mrs. Patterson, Delilah said, keeping her voice even. I was caught in the rain, but I have your rent money. She held out the $5 bill, watching the woman's expression shift from irritation to surprise. Well, Mrs. Patterson said, taking the money and examining it as if checking for forgery. I suppose that is satisfactory. Your room is paid through the end of the month, then. Delilah climbed the narrow stairs to her small room on the second floor, exhausted but happier than she had been in weeks. She arranged the flowers in the only container she had, a chipped ceramic pitcher, and placed them on the windowsill where she could see them from her narrow bed. Then she lay down, still wearing her damp dress because she did not have the energy to change, and fell into the deepest sleep she had experienced since her mother died. She dreamed of green eyes and a garden full of flowers, and when she woke the next morning to pale sunlight streaming through her window, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Ethan arrived at the boarding house just after 5 o'clock the following afternoon, having clearly taken time to clean up after his workday. His hair was damp from washing, his shirt was pressed, and he had traded his work boots for nicer ones that had been polished to a shine. Delilah had also done her best to look presentable, wearing her only good dress, a pale green cotton that had belonged to her mother, and that she had altered to fit her smaller frame. "You look lovely," Ethan said when she came downstairs, and the genuine appreciation in his voice made color rise in Delilah's cheeks. "Thank you. You look very nice as well." They rode out to the Double T Ranch in a wagon Ethan had borrowed, the late afternoon sun warm on their faces. Delilah had spent the morning picking fresh wildflowers, including some late-blooming columbines she had found in a sheltered valley, and she had arranged them into beautiful bouquets that she hoped would impress Mrs. Thatcher. The ranch house was larger than Delilah had expected, a sprawling structure of whitewashed wood with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Flower boxes hung from the porch railing, but they were empty now, the summer blooms long dead. A woman in her 40s came out to greet them, wiping her hands on her apron, her face friendly and curious. "Ethan Tucker, what brings you up to the house?" she asked, then noticed Delilah. "And who is this?" "Mrs. Thatcher, this is Miss Delilah Rhodes." "Delilah, this is Mrs. Sarah Thatcher. She and her husband own the Double T." Ethan helped Delilah down from the wagon, then grabbed the basket of flower arrangements. "Miss Rhodes is starting a flower delivery business, and I thought you might be interested in being her first customer." Sarah Thatcher's eyes lit up when she saw the flowers. "Oh my stars, those are beautiful. Come up on the porch, dear, let me see them properly." Delilah followed her onto the porch, her heart hammering with nervous hope. She had arranged 5 different bouquets, each one showcasing different combinations of the wildflowers she had gathered, and she watched anxiously as Sarah examined each one with careful attention. "These are just lovely," Sarah said finally, looking up at Delilah with warm approval. "How much would you charge for regular deliveries?" Delilah had agonized over pricing all day, trying to balance her desperate need for money with the fear of asking too much. "I was thinking 50 cents for a weekly delivery," she said hesitantly. "That would include 2 arrangements like these, fresh picked and delivered every Monday morning." "Done," Sarah said immediately. "In fact, I will pay you $1 if you can make it twice a week, Monday and Friday. The flowers always brighten my spirits so much, and they die so quickly in this dry climate. And I know at least 3 other ranch wives who would jump at the chance for regular flower deliveries. Would you like me to introduce you?" Delilah felt dizzy with relief and joy. "Yes, please." "That would be wonderful." Sarah insisted they stay for supper, and soon Delilah found herself sitting at a long table in the Thatcher's dining room, surrounded by Sarah and her husband Tom, a burly man with kind eyes, and several of the ranch hands including Ethan. The conversation flowed around her, the men talking about cattle and weather and the upcoming autumn roundup, while Sarah peppered Delilah with questions about her life and her business plans. After the meal, Sarah took Delilah aside while the men lingered over coffee. "Ethan is a good man," she said quietly. "One of the best workers we have got, and honest as the day is long. He does not bring women around often. Actually, he has never brought a woman here before, so I figure you must be pretty special." Delilah felt her face flush. "We only just met yesterday." He was kind enough to help me when I was selling flowers in the rain. Yesterday, Sarah's eyebrows rose. Well, I will be. That boy does not waste time, does he? She smiled and patted Delilah's arm. I am glad he brought you by, dear. I think you are going to do just fine with your business. And I hope we will be seeing more of you around here. Over the next few weeks, Delilah's life transformed in ways she could hardly believe. True to her word, Sarah introduced her to 3 other ranch wives, all of whom signed up for regular flower deliveries. Suddenly, Delilah was making almost $3 a week, more money than she had ever earned in her life. She paid Ethan back his $5 within 10 days, and though he accepted the money, he insisted on taking her to dinner again at the Frontier restaurant to celebrate. That second dinner led to a third, and then a fourth. Ethan started coming into town on Sunday afternoons, his one day off from the ranch, and they would walk together along the river or sit in the small park near the courthouse, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Delilah found herself watching for him, her heart lifting whenever she saw his tall figure approaching, and she noticed the way his face transformed when he smiled at her, the hardness of his cowboy existence melting away to reveal the gentle man underneath. I am starting to care for you quite a bit, Ethan told her one Sunday in late November as they sat on a bench overlooking the Carson River. The cottonwood trees had turned gold, and their leaves drifted down around them like scattered coins. I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot remember a time when I did not want to see you every day. Delilah's heart pounded in her chest. I feel the same way, she admitted. You have changed my life, Ethan, not just with the money, though that helped enormously. But you made me believe that good things could still happen, that not everyone in the world is out for themselves. He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Delilah Rhodes, would you allow me to court you? Properly, I mean. I want to do this right. Yes, she said, the word coming out breathless and happy. Yes, I would like that very much. The courtship that followed was the sweetest time of Delilah's life. Ethan was a perfect gentleman, always respectful, always thoughtful. He brought her small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a pair of warm gloves as winter approached. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting in the back pew and sharing a hymnal, their voices blending on the old familiar songs. He introduced her to his friends from the ranch, and she introduced him to the few acquaintances she had made in Carson City. By Christmas, Delilah had saved enough money to move out of the boarding house and into a small cottage on the edge of town. It was nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was hers, and she felt a fierce pride in having earned it through her own hard work. Ethan helped her move, carrying her few possessions with the same care he would have given fine china, and when everything was in place, he stood in the middle of her tiny parlor and looked at her with such warmth that she felt her breath catch. I am proud of you, he said. You should be proud of yourself too. Look at what you have built. I could not have done it without you, Delilah replied, crossing to stand in front of him. You gave me the chance I needed. You did the work, Ethan corrected. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his hand lingering against her cheek. Delilah, I know it has only been a few months, but I need to tell you, I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that first day, standing in the rain, and every day since has just made it stronger. Tears sprang to Delilah's eyes, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. I love you too, she whispered. So much it scares me sometimes. He kissed her then, soft and gentle, and Delilah felt like she was floating. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Ethan smiled down at her with an expression of such complete happiness that it made her chest ache. I want to marry you, he said. I know I should probably wait longer, court you for a proper amount of time, but I already know you are the only woman I want to spend my life with. Will you marry me, Delilah? She did not hesitate. Yes, absolutely yes. They were married in February of 1879, in the small church in Carson City, with Sarah and Tom Thatcher standing up as witnesses. Delilah wore a simple white dress that Sarah had helped her sew, and Ethan wore his best suit, looking so handsome that Delilah could hardly believe he was hers. The ceremony was short but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Ethan kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance sighed audibly. The newlyweds spent their first months of marriage living in Delilah's cottage, while Ethan continued to save money from his ranch wages. Delilah kept up her flower delivery business, though now Ethan helped her with the gathering and delivery, turning it into a shared enterprise. They talked late into the night about their dreams and plans, about the ranch they would someday own and the family they hoped to have. In May, Tom Thatcher called Ethan into his office with news that would change everything. "I am getting too old to run this place the way it needs to be run," Tom said, his weathered face serious. "Sarah and I have been talking, and we want to move back east to be near her sister. We have decided to sell the ranch, and we wanted to give you first chance at buying it before we put it on the market." Ethan stared at his boss in shock. "Tom, I am honored, but I do not have anywhere near enough money to buy a spread this size." "Hear me out," Tom said. "We are not looking to get rich off this sale. We just want to see the ranch go to someone who will take care of it properly. What if we worked out terms? You pay us what you can up front, then pay the rest over time. Say, over the course of 10 years. We would charge you fair interest, nothing predatory, and you would have time to build the ranch up and make it profitable." When Ethan came home that evening and told Delilah about Tom's offer, she saw the mix of hope and fear in his eyes. "It is such a big risk," he said, pacing their small parlor. "What if we cannot make the payments? What if something goes wrong?" Delilah stood and caught his hands, stopping his nervous movement. "Ethan Tucker, we can do this. We have already proven we can build something from nothing. Together, we are stronger than either of us alone. If this is what you want, what we both want, then we should take the chance." Her confidence bolstered his own, and after several long discussions about finances and practicalities, they agreed to Tom's terms. By June, they owned the Double T Ranch, though the debt hanging over them was substantial enough to keep them both working hard every single day. The first year of ranch ownership was the hardest thing either of them had ever done. Ethan worked from before dawn until after dark, managing the cattle and horses, maintaining fences and buildings, dealing with the 1,000 small crises that arose daily on a working ranch. Delilah kept up her flower business and also took over the ranch accounts, tracking every penny that came in and went out with meticulous care. They hired on 3 ranch hands that Tom had recommended, good men who knew the work and were patient with their young, inexperienced bosses. But slowly, steadily, they made progress. The cattle herd grew. They bred several of their best mares to a prize stallion from a neighboring ranch and sold the foals for good money. Delilah expanded her flower business to include some of the fancier hotels in Carson City, creating elaborate arrangements for their lobbies and dining rooms. Every spare dollar went toward their payments to the Thatchers and improvements to the ranch. In the spring of 1880, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. She was both thrilled and terrified, worried about how they would manage with a baby while still paying off the ranch. But Ethan's joy was so complete and unguarded that it washed away most of her fears. "We are going to be parents," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a family." Their son was born in December, a healthy boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Daniel, after Delilah's father, and Ethan proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband. Delilah would often find him in the nursery late at night, holding the baby and talking to him in a soft voice about the ranch and the life they were building. "Someday all this will be yours," Ethan would whisper to the sleeping infant. "Your mother and we are building something that will last, something you can be proud of." The years passed in a blur of hard work and small joys. They had a second child, a daughter they named Rosemary, when Daniel was 3. Delilah taught Rosemary about flowers, taking her on gathering expeditions as soon as she was old enough to walk, just as her own mother had once done with her. Daniel followed his father everywhere, learning to ride and rope and care for animals with the patient dedication that Ethan modeled. By 1885, they had paid off half their debt to the Thatchers and were no longer living quite so close to the financial edge. They were able to hire more help, which eased some of the crushing workload. Ethan built an addition onto the ranch house, expanding it to better accommodate their growing family. Delilah planted the flower garden she had always dreamed of, filling the space around the house with blooms that perfumed the air and made the rough ranch house look like something from a fairy tale. "You remember that day I found you selling flowers in the rain?" Ethan asked one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the Nevada hills gold and purple. Daniel and Rosemary were playing in the yard, their laughter floating on the warm summer air. "Of course I remember," Delilah said, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "How could I forget? It was the day my life changed." "Mine too," Ethan said softly. "I almost did not stop, you know. I was tired and wet and just wanted to get to the saloon for a drink. But something made me look at you, really look, and I saw this beautiful, determined woman who was not going to let the world beat her down. And I knew I had to at least try to help." Delilah turned to look at him, this man who had become the center of her world. His face was more weathered now, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun and gray threading through his dark hair. But his eyes were the same, that startling green that had captivated her from the first moment. "You did more than help," she said. "You gave me everything. Hope, love, a home, a family, a reason to believe in happy endings." "We gave each other all that," Ethan corrected. "That is what marriage is, what love is. Two people building something together that is stronger than what either could build alone." They kissed as the sun dipped below the hills, their children playing at their feet and the ranch spread out around them like a promise kept. In 1888, they had their third child, another son they named William. By then, the ranch was thriving and they had fully paid off their debt to the Thatchers. Tom and Sarah had moved back east years before, but they exchanged letters regularly, and Tom always signed off by saying how proud he was of what Ethan and Delilah had accomplished. As their children grew, Delilah told them the story of how she and Ethan had met, how a cowboy had bought all her flowers and asked her to dinner, and how that single act of kindness had changed both their lives forever. She wanted them to understand that love was not just about grand gestures and dramatic moments, though those had their place. Real love was in the daily choices, the decision to be kind when it would be easier not to be, the commitment to build something lasting even when the work was hard. Daniel grew into a fine young man who took to ranching like he had been born to it. He inherited his father's patience with animals and his mother's head for business. Rosemary proved to have a gift for growing things, expanding Delilah's flower gardens until they were famous throughout the region. William, the youngest, was more adventurous, talking about someday exploring the wider world, and while that sometimes worried Delilah, She understood the need to forge your own path. In 1895, when Daniel was 15 and talking about his own future, Ethan took him aside for a serious conversation. "Your mother and I have been discussing it, and we want you to know that this ranch will be yours someday. Yours and your brothers and sisters. We built it for you, for the family we hope to have, but you should never feel trapped by it. If ranching is not what you want, if you have other dreams, we will support you in those too." Daniel looked at his father with clear eyes that reminded Ethan so much of himself at that age. "Dad, this ranch is exactly what I want. I love this land, this life. I cannot imagine doing anything else." The relief and pride on Ethan's face made Delilah's heart swell. They had done it, she thought. They had built something lasting, something good. The orphaned girl selling flowers in the rain and the cowboy who had stopped to help her had created a legacy that would continue for generations. On a warm evening in October of 1898, exactly 20 years after that rainy day when they had first met, Ethan and Delilah sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Daniel had married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch the year before, and they already had a baby daughter who was the light of everyone's life. The ranch was more prosperous than ever, the cattle healthy, the land well tended. 20 years, Ethan mused, his arm around Delilah's shoulders. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. "We were so young," Delilah said, smiling at the memory. "I was 19, desperate and scared, standing in the rain hoping someone would buy my flowers so I could eat that day. And you were this handsome cowboy who seemed too good to be true." "I was 25 and lonely," Ethan replied. "Working hard, saving money, but not really living. Then I saw you and something just clicked into place, like I had been waiting my whole life without knowing what I was waiting for." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land, the same golden light that had illuminated that long-ago day in Carson City. Their children were grown and thriving. Their ranch was successful. They had weathered droughts and economic downturns, sickness and loss, the 1,000 challenges that life threw at everyone, and they had come through it all together, their love deeper and stronger for having been tested. "You ever regret it?" Delilah asked suddenly. "Taking a chance on a poor girl selling flowers, tying yourself to someone with nothing?" Ethan turned to look at her, cupping her face in his work-roughened hand. "Not for one single second. You were never someone with nothing, Delilah. You had courage and determination, and a heart that refused to give up. You had everything that mattered, and you gave me everything I never knew I needed." She kissed him then, this man who had been her rescuer and her partner, her lover and her best friend for 2 decades. The kiss was sweet and familiar, carrying the weight of years and the promise of more to come. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they went inside together, their hands linked, ready to face whatever the future held with the same partnership and love that had carried them through everything so far. The ranch would go on, their children would prosper, and the story of the cowboy and the flower girl would be told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could blossom into something beautiful beyond imagining. In the years that followed, Ethan and Delilah watched their family continue to grow and flourish. Daniel proved to be as skilled a rancher as his father, gradually taking over more of the daily operations as Ethan's hair turned silver and his joints began to ache on cold mornings. Rosemary opened her own flower shop in Carson City, building on her mother's original business and expanding it into something even more successful. William did eventually travel, spending several years exploring California and Oregon before returning home, having learned that the wide world was interesting but home was where his heart belonged. They faced sorrows too, as all long lives must contain. They lost friends to illness and accidents. They weathered years when drought made every day a struggle. But through it all, their love remained constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. On a spring morning in 1910, Ethan and Delilah took a wagon ride into Carson City, something they did less frequently now as travel became more tiring. They stopped at the corner where Delilah had stood selling flowers that rainy October day 32 years before, and Ethan climbed down from the wagon to help his wife to the ground. "I can still see you here," he said, his voice roughened by age but still strong. Soaked to the skin, clutching those flowers, too proud to beg but determined to survive. "You were the bravest person I had ever seen." Delilah leaned against him, grateful for his solid strength. "I was terrified," she admitted. "But then you appeared and everything changed." "My whole life changed because one man decided to be kind." They stood together in the spring sunshine, remembering that cold, wet day when two lonely souls had found each other against all odds. The town had grown and changed around them. There were automobiles on some of the streets now, and telegraph wires strung between buildings. The old Silver Dollar Saloon had been torn down and replaced with a bank, but the essence of the place remained, and the memories were as vivid as ever. "I would do it all again," Ethan said. "Every hard day, every challenge, all of it just to have this life with you." "Me too," Delilah whispered. "Every single moment." They returned to the ranch as the afternoon sun began its descent, driving past fields where their cattle grazed and through the gate that bore the Double T brand. Ethan had kept out of respect for the Thatchers who had given them their chance. The house had been painted recently. The flower gardens were in full bloom, and the sound of children's laughter drifted from the barn where Daniel's growing brood was probably getting into mischief. That evening, the entire family gathered for Sunday dinner, a tradition Delilah had insisted on maintaining no matter how busy everyone got. The long table Tom Thatcher had built 40 years ago groaned under the weight of roasted chicken and fresh vegetables, biscuits and pies and all the bounty their land provided. 3 generations sat together, talking and laughing, and Delilah looked around at all the faces she loved and felt a profound sense of gratitude. "I want to say something," Ethan announced, standing and tapping his glass for attention. The conversation quieted as everyone turned to look at him. "Your grandmother and I have been married for 32 years as of last February. In that time, we have built this ranch, raised 3 children, and now have the blessing of watching our grandchildren grow. But none of it would have been possible without that one rainy day when I was lucky enough to see a beautiful woman selling flowers and smart enough to buy them all." Everyone laughed, having heard the story countless times but never tiring of it. "I bought those flowers," Ethan continued, his eyes finding Delilah's across the table, "but what I really got was a partner, a love and a life beyond anything I could have imagined. So I want to raise a glass to second chances, to kindness, and to the woman who made me believe in both. To Delilah." "To Delilah," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Delilah felt tears threaten but held them back, smiling at her husband with all the love in her heart. Later, after the dishes were washed and the children had been sent to bed and the house was quiet, she and Ethan walked out to the flower garden she had planted so many years ago. The roses were blooming, filling the air with their perfume, and the last light of day painted everything in shades of gold and pink. "Thank you," Delilah said, taking Ethan's hand. "For what? For seeing me. For stopping that day. For every day since. For giving me a reason to believe in love and happy endings." Ethan pulled her close, and they swayed together gently under the stars that were beginning to appear in the deepening sky. "Thank you for saying yes," he replied, "for trusting me when you had every reason not to, for building this life with me." They stood together in their garden, the ranch house glowing with lamplight behind them and the vast Nevada sky spreading overhead. Two souls who had found each other when both needed it most, and had created something beautiful from that chance encounter. The flowers Delilah had sold that rainy day had long since withered and died, but the love that had bloomed from that meeting had only grown stronger with time, proving that sometimes the smallest seeds can produce the most magnificent gardens. As they aged into their 70s, Ethan and Delilah gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to Daniel and his family. They remained in the main house, now called the grandparents' wing by the younger generation, and spent their days in peaceful contentment. Ethan still rode out to check on the cattle when his health allowed, and Delilah still tended her flowers, though Rosemary now did most of the heavy work. They watched their grandchildren grow into fine young adults who would carry the family forward. They celebrated births and weddings, mourned losses, and witnessed the world changing in ways they could never have imagined as young people. But through all of it, their love remained the constant, the center around which everything else revolved. On a quiet morning in the spring of 1920, Ethan Tucker died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 67, Delilah holding his hand as he slipped away. The grief nearly broke her, but she found strength in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built, in the life they had shared. She lived for another 8 years, filling her days with flowers and family, passing on stories and wisdom to the younger generations. When Delilah Rhodes Tucker died in October of 1928, exactly 50 years after that rainy day when she had been selling flowers on a Carson City street corner, she was buried next to Ethan on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had loved. Their children placed flowers on both graves, bundles of wildflowers like the ones Delilah had sold so long ago, and told the story one more time of how a cowboy had bought them all and asked her to dinner, and how that simple act of kindness had created a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. The ranch continued under Daniel's capable management, then passed to his children, and then to theirs. The story of Ethan and Delilah became family legend, told and retold, reminding each new generation that love could bloom in the most unexpected places, that kindness was never wasted, and that sometimes the greatest adventures began with the smallest acts of compassion. And in the flower garden that was maintained and expanded by each succeeding generation, the roses that Delilah had planted still bloomed every spring, their beauty and persistence a living memorial to a love that had transformed 2 lives and created something that would last forever.